always goes back to the same point for me, but it's like everyone here really needs to go to therapy. Welcome back to Straight Up Book Club, season 4. We're at season 4, which is wild. And today we're going to be talking about Long Island Compromise by Taffy Brodesser-Akner. Okay, I don't know if I'm butchering that, but this book is so good. And I love the cover.
It's beautiful.
I love the cover. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so like retro. It kind of reminds me of like, is it Nike sneakers? Like, you know, this like color palette. Do you know the ones I'm talking about? They're just like, they're very cool.
I do get like retro Nike vibes. I don't know, like Jordans are always different colors, right? I'm not a sneakerhead. I'm gonna be lying if I try to pretend like I am, but you know.
Same.
All right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so we're talking about the first half, and yeah, Heather, do you want to talk us through like what's happened so far?
Yeah, we read up to page 252, and a lot happened. It's kind of wild. Like, essentially, we started with, I have our notes here as well, because I feel like I'm gonna like forget, but essentially we start with a kidnapping. It's very interesting. It starts in like 1980, and we have our character Carl Fletcher, which I find is hilarious because this is the same author who wrote Fleischman is in Trouble, and the Fleischman and the Fletcher last names, I kept thinking back to the Fleischman one. But it starts with Carl Fletcher, and he's like in his driveway, he's getting ready to go to work, and he gets kidnapped. And this full first part is all about his kidnapping and how his wife tries to find him, and the FBI are kind of recruited. When the kidnappers call, they're like, we have your husband, we're gonna kill him. If you don't bring this like $20,000 or $250,000, however much it is, we are gonna kill him. We already have like cut off his ears and all of his fingers. He's in quite a state. So she's really worried. She takes her kid, who has like separation anxiety, over to JFK Airport, and she leaves the bag of money there. She gets home. When she gets home, the FBI is there, and they're like, we have him. She's like, what do you mean you have him already? Like, I don't even know if I did the instructions right. And they're like, he's in the hospital. He's okay. He's alive. We have him back. She goes to the hospital. He has his ears. He has his fingers. He was found in the basement of the factory that the family owns, which she really struggles with because she's like, he's been like right under our like livelihood this whole time. Like, he's been so close, and he's been missing for a few days, and he had been like, I think it said he was covered in his own like vomit and like urine and feces. Like, he was a mess, and he was in the hospital, but he was okay. He was alive. And his mother, Phyllis, who is this like matriarch of the family, she seems to be like kind of in charge of everything. She tells him essentially, this didn't happen to you, this happened to your body. And the family just kind of decides after that to never talk about it again. So that's
wild. It's like you're compartmentalizing, and you're like, oh, this horrifying thing happened. We're just gonna move past it. Hopefully it doesn't come with us. It doesn't
and yet
work like
so that. Relatable, because I feel like that's something my family would do. Like, they would just be like, we're just never gonna talk about this thing that happened. Like, we're just gonna move on with our lives. But I think it's also, and we'll get into it, I think it's a little bit of a testament to like really religious backgrounds, but also just like families that don't like to talk. They're also New Englanders. My family are New Englanders. They don't like to talk about things. They like to keep it all bottled up, and this is kind of like the mentality. Anyways, yeah. Enough about me. Then we go into like Beamer's perspective, and Beamer is the kid that was in the back of the car. She does have 3 kids. Nathan is the oldest, and then we have Bernard, who's called Beamer, and then they have Jenny. Jenny was not around when this happened. Ruth, the wife, the mother, was pregnant with her, and Jenny came kind of like after the kidnapping. So anyways, we get Beamer's perspective, and we find out that he is not the most like, I don't know what word to use. Like, clearly this kidnapping has had an effect on him.
He's so self-destructive. It's so like those moments where he's just like, oh my God, do you remember the cake or something? Not the cake.
The coffee, like, the cheesecake?
There was that moment. Yeah. But then there's also the moment with the whitefish, and he's like, oh, I'm not quite sure if the whitefish is still good or not, because it was a little bit older and had been sitting out. And like, there's this moment where like he says, I just want to see if it makes me sick, and I felt that. I was like, what? That like you want to test your body to see if you're gonna be okay. But he has so many moments like that.
I've definitely done that before. I don't think in such a self-destructive way, but in more like I don't want to waste food, and even though the sandwich has been in my backpack for 2 days, like I'm just gonna like test the salami and see if my stomach can handle it. Touch of gluten, I'll explode, but like old salami, I feel like I can handle it. Yeah, he is very self-destructive, and one of his like favorite things, one of his favorite pastimes, I guess, is like BDSM. And he specifically has this like dominatrix that he hires every Thursday. He tells his wife he's in therapy. And she comes and, you know, submits him to like various forms of torture. And we find out that it's kind of him trying to relive his father's kidnapping in this like sexual fantasy. And he does this every single week. The other thing that's kind of going on in his life is he is a screenwriter, and he's trying to always like he once wrote a long time ago this movie called, what was it called, like Leaving Santiago or something
I remember the Santiago part, but I think it was like one of those where it's just, like,
one of those
I'm not. Yeah.
shitty action movie that like didn't really go anywhere. It said it came out in like January when there was nothing else out, so it had like, you know, moderate box office success. And him and his writing partner at the time, like they kept trying to write sequels to it, and one day their like producer, I guess, separates them, and Beamer realizes that this was like Charlie's idea. This is his writing partner, that Charlie like doesn't want to work with him anymore. He wants to go off on his own, and his writing partner ends up having like a lot of success. I think he wins Oscars for his screenwriting. He has a lot of actors that want to be in it, and now Beamer's just kind of stuck as this like hack, and he feels like a hack trying to write his stuff.
Well, that part is also so funny because when they're writing together, like Beamer's not doing anything except being like, yes, exactly,
Yes,
that's right.
I
And like
love
I feel
that
like
part.
we've all been there, like in like group projects or work or whatever, where like you think you're working together, but there's one person who's doing like most of the heavy lifting.
Definitely. And like, and if you're in the moment where you're like, I feel like I haven't contributed to any of this, then you feel like you just need to be like the ultimate hype girl. Like I've definitely been there where I'm like, how much did I really contribute here? Okay, well, you're doing great. Like keep going. It's humiliating because then you do feel like a hack. So I kind of get that mentality that Beamer has, which I think is so conducive to like a writer's mentality. Like there's a big chunk of it where he talks about like he'll have written something and he thinks it's the most beautiful, glorious thing he's ever written, and then he'll go back and be like, wait, this is shit. Yeah, everybody says this shit and I get it. This is horrible. It's like useless. And I feel like most writers have kind of been through that, where in the moment you just think it's the most beautiful thing ever, and then you come back and you're like, wow, did I write that? What was I on when I was? But he's struggling with his writing. He kind of has this like, I also feel like this, like there's a lot happening in this book. There's a lot, so I might be like kind of losing track, but the grandmother dies. He brings his wife and his two kids out to Long Island because they're living in LA right now for the funeral. And while he's there, he kind of decides that he's going to write like this beautiful piece about his family. And he flies back to LA. He starts like writing it, but when he's writing it, he starts to take a bunch of drugs. I think it was speed or something, and it was old, and he says to himself, "Oh, so it's like not as potent as it once was," which I think drugs actually get more potent with time. And he's like, no, wait, this is working. And then he has this kind of like episode where he's like running around town trying to find this actor to star in this like drama about his family, and and at the same time he's supposed to go to his daughter's like flute solo, and his wife is on his back, and it's just all this back and forth, and then he like collapses.
Yeah.
And we end his perspective there. And then we go into Nathan's perspective. And I'll try to be succinct, but essentially he is this like person who's wrought with a ton of anxiety. He really was upset when his grandmother died. And the other thing I forgot is that like the family has like lost all their money. And we're in this moment where, you know, this is happening when Beamer's under all these drugs and he's kind of running across town. He's getting these text messages from his sister and his brother saying, we haven't gotten our like lump sum payment because they're supposed to get it every like month, I believe. Like, what's going on? I've checked, like there is no money left. So we know that there's some money issues going on. Then we get Nathan's perspective. He's struggling with money because apparently he had put all, like, millions of dollars, all of his money into his friends, which is really just like a bully of his, like, investment project. And
oh my gosh, when we found out that his broker license was revoked, that like killed me. That was so good.
yeah.
It gave me so much anxiety. And also like Nathan again, you know, is just one of those characters. It's just like so many sort of not discrepancies, but you know, like parts of his personality sort of contradict each other. Like he's so careful in some ways, and then in others, like this instance, he's like really giving in to these like this bullying, really, where, you know, I feel like he knows it's not the right thing to do, and he does it anyway because of this pressure.
Yeah.
And I think probably that speaks to his family dynamic as well.
Yeah, he's definitely a pushover. Like, he's so afraid of displeasing anyone. He doesn't want any kind of confrontation. Like, the guy's a lawyer, but he hasn't progressed as a lawyer because he won't do any of the client-facing things. Like, he's like the guy he's a workhorse. Like, he does a lot of, like, the contracts. These are all things that an associate does or a junior does. Like, not something that someone who's been working for the company for, like, 10 years would be doing. Like, he should be partner at this point. And that's another storyline, is that someone else who's like 6 years behind him was promoted to partner. And so Nathan goes looking for a promotion, and the partner of the firm now is like, hey, like, I actually grew up poor. I didn't have any money, and I worked to be where I was. And I saw you from Middle Rock, Long Island, which seems to be this like super rich part of Long Island. You know, you were given everything. And now I have your uncle, who's a partner at the firm as well, telling me to give you a promotion. He's like, well, you need to do this in order to get your promotion. But the task that he's given doesn't go as planned, so he ends up like bribing this government official, which they get on record. And he obviously, like, he doesn't get fired, probably because of his nepotism, but he's on like unpaid leave for the time being while they try to do this like investigation. So he has no income. All of his money is tied up in this Mickey guy's investments that he's actually, we find out he never invested. He used to create this like lavish lifestyle in order to recruit other clients to invest, but he didn't recruit any other clients. So these millions of dollars are now gone. Everything's gone. Nathan's wife is also like in the midst of doing this kitchen renovation, which leads to them realizing they have asbestos, which makes him like move in with his mother. And it's just this whole mess. So you have Beamer, who's collapsed. The money's gone. Nathan's, like, even, like, his own money that he should have in, like, savings or retirement accounts, that's totally gone. There's nothing left. And that's kind of where we're left off now. There's no money for anyone.
I loved that both sort of chapters ended with that the money's gone, you know?
Yes.
And that's like the end part of it. And you're right, it's like it's all the money. Like it's not just, you know, the family money at this point. And because Beamer also, like, he doesn't have any savings. He's like spending everything that he's getting. And it also doesn't really sound like his job is really getting him anything, because he's like living off of his family's money in that scenario.
He also mentions that he's, like, totally overextended himself because he's got, like, 2 nannies, 2 housekeepers. They have 3 cars. Their nanny and their housekeeper have a car. They have, you know, all these ists, dermatologists and physiologists, and I don't know, like psychics and tarot card readers. And at one point, like, he goes to see a psychic, and she charges him, like, $10,000 to, like, clear his, like, third eye, which is where his creativity is. And he gives her the money. He, like, e-transfers the money, and that's when he kind of goes, wait, like, my balance is kind of low. I'd love to know what a low balance is for these, like, super rich people. I also have a hard time with, like, really, really rich people being like, I've lost all my money. Like, you have assets. I always think of that episode of, I think it was It's Always Sunny, and they're like, they're new poor. We're old poor. They can't deal with being poor. They don't know how to do it. Like, we know what we're doing. Because, like, really, like, they have the brownstone. They have, like, their cars. They have houses. They would just have to, like, sell a lot of things, live a really, like, downsized life, and, like, they would still get by. But, you know, it's just not the lifestyles that they're used to. I shouldn't say that it's funny. Like, it's fiction. Who cares? It is funny. Like, they're all losing their minds over this loss of income, but at the end of the day, like, they have assets galore. They are trying to sell the factory. That was another thing that came up, but it sounds like this factory is, like, such a liability. It's so funny to me that it's this, like, styrofoam factory, but they won't call it styrofoam because it's such a no-no. And they have all these, like, I guess bylaws or whatever, that I don't think that's the right word, but something that's been like grandfathered in, that like they wouldn't be able to sell. They wouldn't be able to sell the property because it's more of like a liability than it is an asset at this point. So it's interesting, all the like things that seem to be given a bit of a blind eye and like for the sake of this family that has a lot of status. But anyways, Nat, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling. Like, is there like what? Let's get into like some of our like biggest looming questions about this first half of the book. What are you most excited
that sounds good.
About?
And also, that was a great like recounting of there's so much that's happened. I think one of the bigger things that I'm curious to get your take on is like this whole relationship that Beamer and Charlie have. You know, like there's sort of this resentment on Beamer's part, where he's like, okay, Charlie is like really successful now, but one of the reasons he's successful, like his TV show at this point, is based on Beamer's family. And like, I was just so curious about that, to get your take on that, because it's like, you know, when Beamer confronts Charlie about this, Charlie says, well, you know, I grew up sort of not exposed in my own family to, you know, this kind of lavish lifestyle, but I did see your family living that. But it's also my father who's like always griping against, you know, and that lifestyle and not having it, and, you know, comparing it as well. So it's Charlie's story in that way, but he ended up writing about Beamer's family. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on like, what are the ethics involved here? Like, you know, if you're writing about someone else's life, but you still experienced it, don't you get to have a perspective and share that?
Yeah, it's funny because I was reading that in the notes and I was thinking a lot about that this morning, about like, what are the ethics from like a law perspective, but then also from like a creative perspective. Like, I'm pretty sure, not a lawyer, not that I need to announce that, but I'm pretty sure in regards to like whether or not it's legal, as long as you're like, you know, this is fiction, any resemblance to real life characters is pure coincidence. Because Law and Order does that every episode, and every episode is a direct pull from a real crime. Like, I remember one I watched recently and it was like, this is the Chanel Miller case, like 100%, like through and through. And obviously they just kind of like rip off these cases, but then like change names, maybe change a couple scenarios, and like I guess it's fine. From an ethical perspective, I don't know, I feel like every writer kind of does pull from all the experiences they encounter. Like, they have their own lens and the way that they see the world and the way that they see these instances, but at the same time, like, it's a little bit of like stealing pieces from different people. So I guess it depends on how close it is to it. But is it ever really going to be... I'm torn, because a part of me is like, yeah, it's Charlie's story, it's not his story. Not Charlie's story, it's Beamer's story, it's not his story to tell. That's one part of me thinking that. And then the other part of me is like, he's never going to fully know Beamer's story anyways, because this is coming from Charlie's lens, Charlie's perspective, which is going to have way more awareness over the wealth and the repercussions of this wealth from this outside perspective of someone who's completely different. Like, he grew up poor, he didn't grow up with this nepotism, this leg up, and so his view on this is going to be so much more different than Beamer's, who's not going to have that level of like self-awareness to describe his own family, I don't think. So I'm torn, I guess. I feel like it's okay, I guess, at the end of the day. What about you?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's like, it's about perspectives, right? And I agree that a lot of writers, like, the fodder is your own life, right? And you're meeting people, you're having these experiences, you're traveling. A lot of that is or revolves around the people you meet, like, in your daily life, right? Like, that is sort of what propels situations that happen, or like characters you meet and all of that. And so even if it's not like fully taken, you're taking in small ways, right? To create your own work. I agree that I think like it's probably okay. But I think the nuance might be where you know, it's down to the details where, you know, if I, for example, took your life and wrote everything that I know about you, you'd be kind of pissed, you know?
No, that's true. And vice versa. Because, like, I think, like, it would also be very obvious. Like, all the stories you've told me about your life and your background, like, I feel like that would create a really interesting, compelling story that would be 100% that's Nat. Like, it wouldn't be anyone else. So, you're right. Like, I do think it is the writer's responsibility to take bits and pieces from a multitude of people to create new people and not just, like, steal a direct story. It's almost a little lazy, like what Charlie's doing. He's like, oh, I've seen this thing happen. This is good enough to create a story, so I'm going to use this as my own. So, yeah, now the pendulum has swung and I'm on the other side where I'm like, no, you're right. If it's a direct, like, if it's a direct correlation, then it's just lazy. Whether it's right or wrong, it's lazy.
That's true. Yeah. It does sort of remind me of like On the Road or something like that, right? Where Kerouac is taking from his life, but he's like referencing the actual characters by name, you know, and it's like his like group of friends or whatever. And so at least, you know, like he puts their full names in there, right? Doesn't he? So there's that aspect. And then to your point about Law and Order, I think there's maybe a difference between like, you know, stories that are part of the culture of the time, you know, and I think maybe for that it's okay to like write your perspective of it, because you're not sharing something that the world doesn't already know. So I think there's a lot of nuances, but if I agree with you, it's also like your responsibility as a writer to kind of change it up and like, you know, not have it be just one person. Yeah. And you brought up something interesting about, you know, the repercussions of money as well. And like one of the other things I'd love to talk about is about Arthur. You know, Arthur is another one of those sort of side characters, but I feel like we're going to get to know a lot more about him as we go. We find out like he's like a central person in their family business, and he apparently had an affair with Ruth, and hopefully we'll find out more about that. But he's disappeared, and his disappearance lines up with when the money's gone. So do you think that he just like orchestrated some sort of like deal, took the money and ran? What do you think's going to happen there?
Something is sus. He did something. Whether it was like he saw this, the way that the factory ended up being obsolete is because obviously the stuff can be manufactured in China for way cheaper, and somehow they had found this like one client who was going to take them on and use them as the factory for their own styrofoam supply. And then I guess this one client decided to drop them. That's really risky, is having this like one client for this entire business. So I'm sure Arthur, who knows everything, got wind that this client was going to drop them. So maybe it was one of those like insider trading kind of things where it's like maybe he took his chunk like out and left. Or maybe he orchestrated this deal with the client so that he switched their providers but then got a kickback and now he's leaving. There's something sus going on. He's not innocent. The sabbatical, like, it's not a sabbatical. And then the fact that he had like left his phone behind, and they like that was the moment when Ruth found out. She cried. She knew that that meant that like he didn't want to be contacted, didn't want to be a part of any of this. But at the same time, Arthur has his own life outside of the factory. Like, he's a partner at this huge firm. So, like, he kind of does have to come back to work at some point. Unless he got enough money where he doesn't and he's just gone forever. Like, I don't know. But then that's also, like, the easy stuff. Like, did something happen to Arthur and it's been made to seem like, nah, he's sus. He did something. Point. But maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. There's something going on there. I also love the fact that the family all knows that, like, Ruth and Arthur have been, like, having this affair for quite some time. Isn't Arthur, like, Carl's brother? That's the relation or something?
Oh, is he? I missed that. That's interesting.
For some reason, I felt like he was, like, the brother-in-law or something. So it was, like, there was an extra layer of ick there. I can't remember exactly. I'll have to go back and take a look. But, yeah, there's another, like, family relation there. And the whole family was like, yeah, Arthur is, like... He is Nathan's second cousin. So however that adds up, because someone calls him his uncle. He's like, no, he's not my uncle. It's his dad's cousin. It's Carl's cousin. That's what it is. So it wasn't, yeah.
Oh. Is Arthur the same person as, like, who wanted Nathan to have a promotion? Like,
Yes.
oh, that's the same
Right?
person.
Am I
Okay, cool.
wrong? Now
I
I'm
might have just
confusing
missed that.
myself. I think it's the same person.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I thought we hadn't, like, really met him yet, other than, hearing about him. But I could be totally wrong. You pick up on these details way more than I do. I tend to sort of miss stuff like that.
It's also possible I'm making it up. And it's like someone named Adam or something, and like, writers and their same names. Oh my God, sorry, this is a tangent, but I watched Gone Girl last night because you inspired me to. And the
Nice.
wife's name and the mistress's name are Amy and Andy. And I'm like, what is up with this? Because at one point they're talking about Andy, and I'm like, Amy's gone. Like, what are they talking about? And then I realized it's the two different people. So there's a thing, and I've done it too. So it's a thing. We just want to call people the same names. What is
I
that? There's
wonder.
got to be like a term, like a psyche or a not a psyche, like a phenomenon that amounts to that.
I
I feel
love
like
that
we're
we're
gonna need
picking up on this more now. You're like,
every book
all
we
the
read, we're
character
just gonna
names.
be looking for it. One thing that I wanted to talk about, if you're open, is like there seems to be this big theme in the book about how like money solves problems, and it starts in like the very first bit, where Ruth, someone who was like very superstitious, she even like talks about how like she comes from a family where like you throw salt behind your shoulder, always say God willing and stuff like that, which is something that I find myself doing all the time too. And she was just always kind of afraid of what the future might hold until she married Carl, who had a lot of money. And I think there's a really beautiful line, I think it's on like page 14, and it says she'd stopped summoning these superstitions, those shots in the dark for protection, pretty much completely after she'd met and married a man whose wealth was its own elaborate system of safeties. So it comes up there, and then it also comes up with Alyssa, who grew up in an Orthodox family. Alyssa is Nathan's wife. And, when she first met Nathan, Nathan thought that he'd have to, become Orthodox in order for her to accept him, which his parents really didn't like. There was a part where she's like, "No, we're the kind of Jews that eat bacon. Like we're not, like Alyssa's family." And Nathan approaches her on this, and she's kind of like, "Look, like I grew up in a family where my dad was this great. I think he was like a clarinetist or something, and he could never get gigs because he wouldn't work like the Sabbath. He couldn't get the gigs that he needed. There was a really beautiful line. I can't remember what it was, but it was like he could never make it big. Something about like he would never make it big even if he was discovered because he could never take the gigs given to him. Something along those lines. And she's like, there was a lot of stress in my household because of this. And I don't want that for my life. She's essentially like, I'm okay with giving this up if it means I can have like the safety and security of being immersed in wealth like your family. So this theme kind of comes up a lot. And I wanted to know your perspective. Like, and there's a lot of like studies about whether or not like money buys happiness and stuff like that. And I did think that instead of approaching it from like a happiness perspective, it approached it more from like a safety and security perspective. What do you think of that, especially in this theme of like now they've lost it all, so what comes next? But then also, did they seem that safe and secure before they lost it all? So yeah, I was a little bit curious about what you thought of all that.
That's a good point. Were they safe and secure before they lost all of that? That's a great nugget. I think there was a lot of truth to that. I think you and I are both big into personal finance, and we're sort of immersed in these conversations a lot of the time. And I don't know if it's happiness, but it's sort of, yes, safety and security. When you are when you have a little bit more extra, you're able to, afford housing in safer neighborhoods, have money for emergencies, for health scares, things like that, even like preventative health care, all of that like really feeds into it. So I think there's a big element of just being able to care for yourself better if you have the funds to do that. And that's a reality. It's a really shitty one, but and I think that the stresses that alleviates feeds into happiness in the long run. And I think there's probably a cap to it, right? So I know for a while people were saying it was 60,000. I don't think that's true. I think that was a number that people just pulled out
Yeah,
of nowhere.
it was 75. I remember that in because I learned that in like psychology 101 in university. It's like once you get to 75,000, like inflation now is probably like double that. But I don't know
Yeah, but
how true it is.
I do think there's probably a number where past that, it's sort of more just like you just get, it's not really adding to your happiness at the same level or your safety and security at the same level, of course, you know. So once all your sort of basic needs are met, and you know you have the healthcare, you have the safe housing, you have you know the vacations that help you live a less stressful life. Um, I think past that, maybe when we're at the level of the Fletchers, maybe it's not contributing that directly, and it might actually be having this like really negative impact. Like to your point, you know, they're sort of not growing in certain ways because they're so used to um, uh, like the status quo in some of this aspect, right? So Beamer's maybe not challenging himself because he kind of doesn't need to, you know. Nathan also is sort of in a similar spot, and he's actually like overspending on insurance, and that's almost a crutch too, you know. Also, always goes back to the same point for me, but it's like everyone here really needs to go to therapy.
And not a dominatrix as your therapist.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah.
that on the side if you want, but like you need therapy as well.
But
I
what do you
think
think? Like, yeah.
I think and as you're describing it, I'm realizing that like I do think that it buys security, but if you have it in surplus, and none of them do. They're all overextending themselves. So at the end of the day, are they really that different from someone who's living paycheck to paycheck? Like Beamer saying that he's like he claims that he's overextended himself and all of the like houses and the nannies and the this and the that. And so when the money's gone, they don't really have a safety net. Like it sounds like, and they this comes up in the book where it's like I can't remember how the author puts it, but it says that they spent their money in the same way most American middle class people do, which is, you know, once they have it, they spend it. So none of them had like an emergency fund, it seems. Like nobody has like a safety net. So they're not really like, Nathan has all these like insurances, but it's not cash on hand. Like no one seems to have something for when their income disappears. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between money as safety and security and just being rich. Like I know I brought up that I watched Gone Girl 2 earlier last night,
Mm-hmm.
and it, you know, this couple had the illusion of wealth because they had this like McMansion, he was driving a Volvo, he owned a bar, they had like, you know, on paper beautiful things, but at the end of the day they were drowning in credit card debt. I mean, she planted that, but it seemed like they were overextended in many ways. So at the end of the day, this created like a huge um, piece of contention between the two of them, and it seems like this family is very much the same. Like they haven't really protected themselves in the way that's more important. They protected themselves in the way where they're like they're in the nice neighborhoods and they drive the safe cars and they have the insurances, but they're not actually protecting themselves from not having this income anymore, which is kind of
Yeah.
interesting. So I guess like yeah, to a certain extent it does buy safety and security if you're doing the right things with it. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
And they
now
didn't
they're
have any investments either.
no, yeah, exactly. Just this Mickey guy. So, yeah, there's another red flag. Have
Yeah.
your retirements ready, folks.
Lifestyle creep is real.
It
You
is.
know, you
It
gotta
really
keep an eye
is.
on that.
Yeah, no matter how wealthy you may feel. But I mean, like I said earlier, this family's now new poor, so they're gonna have to figure out what to do with this like lack of income.
It ties to something else that stuck out to me. And it's this like point around. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but a debug.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
right, like this theme comes up a lot. It's like I think they describe it as like a spirit that's stuck between the living and dying worlds, and just sort of like causing havoc in their lives. And the reason it sticks out to me is that it feels like a way of not taking responsibility for the things that are going wrong in your life, or not wanting to solve it, or really analyze what's happening. And like myself as well, like growing up in a religious household, like there's a lot of that where you kind of don't want to think about it too much, so you just sort of label it as something that's out of your control when it really might not be. So I'm kind of
In
curious
God's
for your
hands.
take on that. Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. Anytime something bad happened, it was like the Lord's testing me and blaming things on, the devil being in disguise. Like I do think it is very much caught up in this like religious upbringing. What about you?
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And that's sort of my experience of it as well. And it's, I heard a lot of God willing, and, that it'll happen if God wants it to.
Yes.
And I think that really takes away from your agency of like, I'm going to work for this and I'm going to, make this happen, because you have the control to make stuff happen as well. So I think like I'm on the same page. Like it just like, it's a way of, you know, um, being okay with, the things
Your
that are going
lot
wrong in
in
our life.
life.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And also, it like ties into maybe, I think at some point they say, well, we have had the worst thing happen to us, so nothing bad can happen to us now. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's also, I think, this element of like faith that I've done my time.
Mm-hmm.
And so now everything's gonna be rosy and perfect for us. And we find out that it's not like that. It never is like that. And outside of you know this sort of mentality as well, no one, you know like bad things happen to good people. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter
And
how
good
much you've
things happen to
suffered.
bad people.
Exactly.
Like,
So and that's
unfortunately.
like exactly, and it's like a theme that persists. So I think, I don't know. I think now that Nathan's life is unraveling too, and he's starting to see this debug, or he thinks that's what it is in the back of his car and all of that. I think like maybe that's tying together as well. Like he doesn't want to take responsibility for, bribing or not getting that promotion or any of that. That's how I've been reading this.
He doesn't want to be responsible for anything. Like it's so clear in like the way that he's chosen his job, the fact that he buys all these insurances and the insurance for his insurance in case that goes wrong. Like he's kind of created this like almost like security fence around him or whatever you want to call it in order to keep him from having to like do anything. Like this moat almost so he can just like sit in his castle and be okay, but like now he's that, moat of security or whatever is crumbling and he's going to have to deal with it. And in doing so, he is seeing this like debug, just another way to cast blame on something else. It is really interesting. I want to see more of that. It has like these elements of like, I don't know, like surrealism or like fantasy that's kind of interesting. And I'm excited to see how this develops. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, by the way. Is it debug?
I don't know. I'm pronouncing it phonetically. So
Okay.
if we got it wrong, please correct us, or we can also just look it up after.
I'm excited to see how it unfolds. But yeah, this has been really, really good. I'm excited to see the rest of it. Like, I think there's a lot that is gonna happen. Like right now, Beamer's collapsed. We don't know if he's dead or alive. Mickey's in a coma. We don't know if he's gonna come out of it dead or alive. Nathan, who knows what's gonna happen to him? Arthur, like there's so many questions. I can't wait. Like as soon as this is done, I'm gonna start reading this again. I have stuff to do today, but I'll get a few pages in because I'm just like really excited to keep going.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm excited to keep reading. Um, yeah, these chapters are really long. I'm not quite sure how many chapters we have left in the next half, but I hope we get Jenny's perspective, maybe
Yes.
Ruth's perspective as well. And I'd love to know what's going on with Arthur. And I also need to go figure out if that was Nathan's
I
boss.
know. Now I have no idea. Jenny, I'm really excited about because right now we only see her as this like aloof, unemotional character who wasn't really around for the kidnapping. So she almost has like a leg up in regards to family trauma, if you can even like say it that way. But yeah, I'm really interested to know what's going on in her head.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll end it there, and everyone read up with us. Let's figure out what's happening with this family. And yeah, we'll pick this up next week and chat about the rest of it.